Welcome to Sagely Speaking with Mary Bono, the esteemed former Congresswoman known for her insightful perspectives and vast experience. Prepare to be engaged in thought-provoking conversations with influential personalities, exploring a wide range of topics, from social issues, politics, and policy, to personal development, shedding light on important issues that impact our society. Now, here's Mary.
Welcome to Sagely Speaking. I'm your host, Mary Bono, and I thank you for joining us. My guest this week is absolutely phenomenal, and I look forward to our conversation. But first, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Mothers Against Prescription Drug Abuse, MAP to Action, and Communities United for Smart Policy, or CUSP. All of our sponsorship information can be found on our website at sagelyspeaking.com. I am grateful for their support in helping to make this podcast possible. And now I'm going to introduce our phenomenal guest. I'm just so thrilled that he's here. Bill Bodner is a recently retired federal law enforcement executive with nearly 32 years experience. He is a nationally respected subject matter expert and trusted spokesman on the business and financial operations of transnational drug trafficking and money laundering organizations. Bill served as the special agent in charge at the DEA Los Angeles, where he was responsible for overseeing the operations of 14 DEA offices located in Nevada, Hawaii, Guam, Saipan, and then 7 Southern California counties, which make up the greater Los Angeles area. Earlier in his career, he worked at DEA's Special Operations Division, where he coordinated several high-level multi-jurisdiction investigations and worked on high-value target capture operations and classified projects. I needed to take a breath in all of that. Bill, what a career you have had.
Thank you, Mary. And thanks for inviting me to be here to talk with you.
Well, it's really great to have you, and our mutual friend Sam suggested that we meet, and I thank Sam for that. But I was thinking, when I look at 32 years, and again, I think that we're old when we think of 32 years of a career like you've had. But can you talk a bit about those 32 years and how the drug abuse and overdose crisis has evolved over your 32 years?
So that's a fascinating question. And believe it or not, a lot of us think of fentanyl as a new thing, but I can remember fentanyl in 1991 in New York City, something called Tango and Cash heroin. And it was one heroin mill who had a, adventurous chemist there, and he started mixing fentanyl with heroin, and dozens of people died. And they got rid of that, they, meaning DEA, got rid of that one heroin mill. And what happened? The problem went away. The biggest change I've seen over those 30 years has been this kind of recent transition from plant-based drugs like the heroin and cocaine that we kind of know from the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s towards synthetic drugs that are much more powerful and much more dangerous. That's really been the big transition, and also the way drugs are marketed. And I'm sure we'll get into this. That's kind of something that's new, and that's caused a big increase in the harm in our country today.
It's also evolved a lot. I did not know that about fentanyl in 1991.
Yeah.
Thank you. And it's amazing that they could shut it down.
Yep.
If only it were that simple today, right?
Right.
But we have to start with the let's call it the headwaters of the fentanyl crisis, and that's China. Yeah. Is it not? I mean, China is still who is providing the precursors, sending them to Mexico. And according to previous guests, expert witnesses, I would say, they've, of course, talked about the partnerships between the Chinese and the cartels.
Yep. Yeah.
So that's
100% true. So, and to put it in perspective, the transition of the fentanyl market, the point I always like to make, Mary, is the height of the prescription opiate epidemic in this country was 2012. 255 million opiate prescriptions in the United States. The adult population of the United States at that time, something like 234 million. Does that mean everyone was on an opiate drug? No, that means there were a lot of people on a lot of opiate drugs. And as we saw more responsible prescribing and we saw those prescriptions go down, that's when we saw these enterprising traffickers. And actually at that time, they were domestic people here in the United States establishing relationships with companies in China and ordering fentanyl directly from China. It would be sent to the U.S. in overnight package, like DHL package or something like that. and they would press fake pills here in the United States and put them out as if they were prescription drugs. And hey, was that bad? Yes, that was very bad. That was 2012 to 2015 or so. What really made an exponential difference in the issues we were seeing was when the Mexican drug cartels around 2016 got into the production of fentanyl. So then they started getting the raw chemicals from China, making huge amounts of fentanyl, putting it in the United States. And they kind of put those independent dealers in the U.S. who had been getting fentanyl directly from China out of business because they couldn't compete with the economies of scale that these drug cartels in Mexico had. And it is that marriage between Mexican drug cartels and Chinese chemical suppliers that's really driving this, not just fentanyl crisis in our country, but the synthetic drug crisis in our country right now. Because, I know everyone hears about and speaks about fentanyl the most, but methamphetamine is also having an incredibly harmful effect in our communities. And a lot of times we're able to ignore it a little bit just because of how it presents itself. Mental health issues, addiction issues, homelessness, a lot of the things that methamphetamine does to the body, it's just a lot more drawn out than fentanyl, where it's kind of instant death. But no, it is exactly a fact that it's the marriage between Chinese chemical suppliers and Mexican drug cartels that's really flooding this country with dangerous drugs right now.
It's actually terrifying.
Yeah.
Because I think these bad guys will smuggle anything, create anything, smuggle anything to make a cheap buck.
Yep.
With absolutely no consideration for the American people and specifically our children.
That's a great point, Mary. So let me say something to that. People ask, like, well, when did drug users in this country start wanting fentanyl? The answer is never. It's never. It was a supply-determined market. So just like you just said, the drug cartels decided this is a drug we can make huge amounts of money on, fentanyl, and methamphetamine too. But these are drugs that we can make huge amounts of money on because they're not plant-based. They're just chemical-based. They decided that those are going to be the drugs they deal and ship here to the United States. So those are the drugs we're going to have social issues with here in this country. It's determined by them, and they make that determination based on profitability.
So what's our best defense?
Boy, great question. Hey, the one thing that I've been telling people, especially for the past 5 or 6 years, is, and this may sound a little strange, knowing my background, 32 years in law enforcement, I believe in the law enforcement mission and supply reduction. I think supply reduction is harm reduction. I want to say that up front. But education right now is so important. Here's why. These drug cartels, the way they've been able to make these drugs so popular is by deceptively marketing them, right? They've taken a drug 50 times more powerful than heroin. And when a teenager, Mary, thinks of heroin, what do they think about? A hypodermic needle, a tourniquet, a lighter, a spoon, things that are, let's call them scary, or maybe that would deter them from using that drug. And they've taken a drug 50 times more powerful than that, and now they make it look like a little bright blue pill or a little bright yellow pill, and it's half the size of an Advil tablet. So teenagers, or really anyone, adults too, are looking at that drug saying, that can't be that bad, right? So we've taken those traditional kind of barriers away, that things that used to stop people from experimenting with these hardcore drugs. And now we've made that drug very accessible to people. And education is what's important to let people know, like, okay, what is fentanyl? What does it do to the body? Where is it in the drug supply chain? And how can I keep myself safe from it? And I think if we do that, we can kind of take a big piece of the harm that's based on deception right out of it. There are a lot of people that still to this day, they feel like if they're buying a quote Xanax pill on the street, they're getting a real Xanax, with a benzodiazepine in it. And they're not, right? They're not at all. It's a fentanyl pill disguised to look like a Xanax. That's the point we have to get our children to know, because, hey, here's the reality. We're asking our children to make adult decisions. We got to empower them with information and let them know what's going on in this illicit drug world so that they can make better decisions. So education's super important right now, especially of our young people.
I couldn't agree with you more. Prevention.
Yeah.
It becomes more and more important every day. But something, I'm going to ask you some things that are more policy related and maybe controversial.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're looking forward to that. I've been an activist in this space since about 2007. And over the years, our language has changed a lot, some for good, some for bad.
Mm-hmm.
But when people say the failed war on drugs or just say no didn't work, it seems like there ought to be some pushback on that.
Yeah.
And I don't quite understand. Maybe I don't completely understand what they're saying. Obviously, there has been some injustice and issues there, but the war on drugs can mean a lot of things. And it is raising the education and taking the prevention piece out there and truly trying to break through to people who aren't hearing our messages. Now, sadly, Bill, I know most people don't pay attention to this problem until it bites them in the butt.
Oh, yeah.
And they've lost a family member or loved one.
Mary, I have spoken to parents who have said to me, why didn't DEA issue any warnings about this drug? And this is like 2021. And I would say, we did. We issued a national warning in 2019, but nobody listened. Nobody picked it up. Nobody put it on the front page of the paper at that time. With respect to the war on drugs, here's what it is. The reality is it's a war on drug harm. The role that law enforcement plays is extremely important. And supply reduction, which law enforcement practices, it's one of the most statistically sound methods of harm reduction that there is. And how do we know this? We know this from the CDC. The CDC tracks drug supply and drug harm. So look at their data and see what happens when drug prescriptions for certain drug go down. The drug harm related to that drug goes down. The other thing I'll say about the war on drugs is it's not, and to some extent, I know people will say, oh, that's a cop out. You're saying that because you're a cop. It's really not fair to assign to law enforcement the duty of, correcting a 100-year dysfunctional relationship that Americans have had with illicit drugs. Like, that's not a law enforcement role. Law enforcement's role is, like I said, reduce the supply and try to take the bad actors out of the equation so they hurt less people. If I were to tell you that the homicide rate per capita in the United States today is greater than it was 70 years ago, would you say that we have fought a losing war on homicide for the past 70 years and we ought to just pack it in? We shouldn't prosecute murders anymore. We should just say whatever happens, happens. Of course not. Of course not. Here's the reality. And when I talk about this one case, people think it's, cherry picking, I guess is the term. It's not. There are cases like this every month. This one was really the first one of its kind that I was involved with personally. It was September 2020, a town called Pasadena, California. One drug dealer led to 7 poisonings and 3 deaths in one weekend, right? So the question I ask people is, if you don't want to incarcerate that drug dealer, what happens the next weekend? And that's a real question. What are your expectations the next weekend? Like, what do you think that person's going to do, or what harm do you think they're going to cause? And the reality is, because drug trafficking is a greed-driven crime, there's a cycle of greed, harm, unless law enforcement intervenes, the cycle doesn't stop. It keeps going. So I think the law enforcement mission is incredibly important. Don't be deceived when people say the war on drugs has failed. We have drug issues in this country. It's not the role of law enforcement, again, to correct the relationship that Americans have with illicit drugs. It's the role of law enforcement to reduce drug harm, to keep people safe.
I understand that and agree. Of course, having been a policymaker, legislator, I certainly appreciate when the DEA has to do what they're asked to do or told to do. And you've got DOJ, and it gets quite complicated with some of these layers. And I think some of those layers might have been part of the problem with the prescription drug epidemic in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. The one thing I tell people is they ask like how we got to the current situation. And I say, Big Pharma did the marketing for the drug cartels. Big Pharma created this demand for prescription pills. I already talked about the numbers. There was a very, very small percentage of providers in this country, extremely small percentage, that was unethical. And just as if there's a small percentage of law enforcement officers that are unethical, it wreaks havoc. We've seen that. It's the same true in the medical profession. So we created this demand for opiate drugs, prescription opiate drugs. We recognized it as a society. We said, this isn't healthy. This isn't good. We dialed it back, and the drug cartels were kind of sitting on the sidelines, just licking their chops, saying, oh, okay, now we see what the American public wants. We're going to create this drug, but we're going to create it our way, in a way that we can maximize our profits. And we really don't care about medical studies, patient testing, getting it approved by the FDA. Those things don't really.
Clean labs.
Yeah. Clean labs is a huge part of it. They just decided to make counterfeit pills. So M30s, the old roxicodone pills, those are the most counterfeited pill in existence. They have they're small blue tablets, an M on one side, a 30 on the other. Percocets, and as I said earlier, the one that gets a lot of young people, Xanax pills, teenagers who have some kind of, teenage stress, mental health issue. They're not talking to a trusted adult. Instead, they're self-medicating, and they're going to social media, unfortunately, because that's where they live their lives, right? There's a good reason why that's where they go to get drugs. It's because that's where they live their lives. It's on social media. So it's a natural for them to go to social media to find a drug supplier. It's so easy to do. And the pills they get are fake 100% of the time now. And I only know that because when I was at DEA, we acquired millions of pills a year, and we tested them. They come from the drug cartels. They have fentanyl in them, but that's really the only active ingredient. So buyer beware.
Well, Bill, I'm going to interrupt our conversation for a minute to thank our sponsors and then continue with this, because I think the social media component is very important, hopefully for parents to hear. But I do want to thank Communities United for Smart Policy for their support of Sagely Speaking. The fentanyl crisis is putting unbearable strain on families and communities across the country. We need comprehensive action that stops the illegal flow of fentanyl across our border and provides our communities with tools like readily accessible naloxone to help save lives. Please join Communities United for Smart Policy and continue the conversation on X and Facebook at Cusp Action to help bring an end to this preventable tragedy. So back to you, Bill, and the social media component.
Yeah.
And it's not that the kids, it seems to me, they're not just seeking out drugs there, but they're being targeted. Yeah. Are they not, by 100%. Dealers?
Yeah. So here's the challenge now. And I talked about it a little bit earlier, is these real powerful drugs, like the worst drugs that are out there in the illicit drug world. It used to be, there were what I would call kind of traditional barriers to use. Like, not all kids knew where to get them. And if you knew where to get them, you might say like, oh, I don't want to go to that area. I grew up in North Jersey. So the place where hard drugs were across the George Washington Bridge into New York. I wasn't going to go there to do that because I just wasn't real comfortable with that, right? Contrast that with today, where in a social media platform like Snapchat, and I single them out, but the reality is it's on all platforms, Mary. You being a drug dealer can create a drug menu, and it's going to be super colorful and have emojis and prices, and it's going to have a QR code on it, and I'm going to tag it with a location. So let's say there's an event, a kid's concert event somewhere in a park or something like that. I'm going to tag it with that location. So now any Snapchat user that's at that location, this will come up on their feed, and they can immediately see what I have. They can add me as a quote friend or whatever with the QR code, and we can conduct a transaction. And now that I'm friends with them, the algorithm or the artificial intelligence may start suggesting me as a friend to their friends. So you can see how I can kind of infiltrate the network. social media platforms and the smartphone have made, and this is something that parents have a difficult time grasping because it's so different than when they were kids. Social media platforms and cell phones have made everyone's neighborhood an open air drug market, just meaning that now, no matter where you live, the most dangerous drugs are available in your neighborhood and any kid can get them. This kid can have them delivered and can pay with them by one of the online payment apps. That's a danger. That accessibility that's there now to drugs was never there before. And it's one of the reasons why we've seen like this super increase in drug harm. And really, when this, I don't want to say there's always been drug sales on the internet since there was an internet. But where I saw social media platforms, this explosion in drug sales was during the pandemic. And what it was drug dealers realizing that the normal places they would go to sell drugs were shut down, social gathering places. So what did they do? They went where everyone else went, which was if we can't meet in person and we're going to socialize online on a social media platform, then I guess that's where I'm going to go to sell drugs. I will go online to a social media platform. And what happened is it became so successful and so comfortable for people that when things opened up again, the drug sales on the platforms just continued. And now it's kind of the way of business, especially for young people. I saw a study in the UK that 3/4 of the kids who reported using drugs had got them on via social media. And I would bet that the other 25% got them from someone who got them from someone on social media. So social media is a huge conduit for illicit drugs to teens, and parents just have to be aware of that and know that that's going on so they can have the right strategy at home.
Bill, something you said, I think needs some emphasis. And you said, let me paraphrase you.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Let me paraphrase you. So the combination smartphone and social media is equivalent of an open air drug market.
Yep. And so what that means is, think of the most common or the most atrocious open air drug market you can think of. People openly selling drugs on a street corner where you can get anything at the drop of a hat. And now imagine that look out your window, no matter where you live. It does not matter where you live. Look out your window and understand that because of the smartphone and because of social media apps, that is your neighborhood now. I can't tell you how many cases I've seen of teens, unfortunately, dying of fentanyl poisoning who got the drugs online, on social media, by a delivery service, and paid on an app. And a lot of times they were home, went out to walk the dog, or just told their parents, I'm going to run out for a minute, went down the street, met a delivery man, came back, and guess what? That night, they passed away in their bed upstairs in their bedroom at home. This is unfortunately, the common thread to a lot of the teenage deaths. And it's because of how these drugs are more accessible now than ever before.
Well, we on this show have endorsed Sammy's Law. Mm-hmm. Again, Sam Chapman and his wife, Laura Berman, after losing their son, Sammy, to this very scenario.
Yeah.
And it seems so simple. And we've had Congressman Buddy Carter on. We're going to have Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz on. They're both the original co-authors of Sammy's Law in the Congress, in the House.
Right.
But it seems so simple. But I've also been up against big industries like tech, mm-hmm. and understand how hard it is to get these things. Although they're no-brainers, it's still hard to get them done because of the lobbying power. The Sammy's Law would give third-party software the opportunity to monitor, not spy on, but monitor their, a child if they all sign up for this, and then issue an alert if there's a word, whether it's drugs or opioids, Xanax, bullying, and hopefully this passes this year. But I don't want necessarily, if you want to weigh in on your support or not of that.
I support that. I support Sammy's Law. I support COSA right now. Hey, are they all perfect laws? In my opinion, no. But we have to do something. We, in the lawsuit now that's currently ongoing in LA County, originally filed by, Mr. Chapman, one of the plaintiffs in the case, 65 families, I think it may even be more now, suing Snapchat one of the things that's alleged in the lawsuit is that Snapchat may be purposely thwarting third-party parental monitoring tools. Now, imagine that if you're a parent who's, you know what the threat is. You decide to educate yourself. You decide to do something about it. You've got third-party monitoring tools. You feel like you've taken control of the situation and that now you can keep your kids safe. You don't know that when the next software update comes for that platform, that all of a sudden those tools are wiped out. You know, is that happening now? I don't know, but that's the allegation. And if that's happening, imagine how do you overcome that? How do you overcome that as a parent and keep your child safe?
That's a great question. And whether it's this threat or who knows what the next threat is going to be, it almost seems to me no internet for your children, but that's not even reasonable. When I was in Congress, we had the Children's Online Privacy Act and fought hard to make sure kids were protected, but it doesn't seem to be effective right now. But I'm going to go to, sorry.
No, I was just going to say one more thing. And what it goes to is I make a lot of connections with what and I don't know, this may not resonate with people. I apologize, but I make a lot of connections of what I see happening with social media platforms right now with what I saw in the banking industry in the late 80s with money laundering, meaning that they're making tremendous amounts of money. In the 80s, banks made tremendous amounts of money by, let's say, welcoming dirty money, drug cash. You could bring in duffel bags of cash to the bank and the bank was making money on it. It was okay. It wasn't until the government set some parameters and set up reporting requirements and a bunch of different things that we saw those businesses start investing in back-end compliance, back-end security. Why? The CEO of a bank or the CEO of a social media platform, their fiduciary duty is maximize shareholder return. That's it. It's not keep your kids safe. Don't mistake what their responsibility is. Every dollar that they spend on platform safety that they don't have to spend comes away from their bottom line. And unfortunately, believe it or not, that's what one of the issues is. It's they're not spending the money to better police the platform because they don't have to. And I think Sammy's Law and COSA and, I think it's time for some laws to really force them to take a closer look at the traffic on their platforms.
Well, another one, law that's named after a child, Alexandra's Law.
Yep.
I know this is the prosecutorial side of things, but that a fentanyl dealer who knowingly deals fentanyl and kills somebody ought to have a very, very stiff penalty.
Yeah, it's called a Watson advisement, right?
Yes.
I mean, something, so here, Mary, here's how crazy this is. Something we do in drunk driving cases, right? It's done right now for drunk driving cases in the state of California. They're unwilling to do it for fentanyl caused death cases. And I just don't understand why that is. So what that law would be is if you're selling fentanyl, if you're caught selling a drug, you're given an admonishment. At the time you're sentenced, let's say you plead guilty, you're given an admonishment and you're told, sir, madam, the drug you are selling is inherently dangerous. It could in fact kill someone. If you deal drugs again, and the drugs you deal kill someone, you may be charged with murder or manslaughter or some serious crime. We're just making you aware of that today so that you can make appropriate decisions going forward in life. And in California, unless something has changed very recently on the state side, they were unwilling to force that advisement.
That's still the case. And that's why it's wrapped up into a ballot initiative in California. And of course, the backers of that initiative working hard for everything you have to do to qualify a ballot initiative, gather the signatures, get the funding. But I think the voters in California are fed up with an awful lot. And this is one of those things that just doesn't make sense to people. But before we wrap, we don't have to, I could, all of my guests I could spend so much time with, but I think the listeners have limited time in their lives. One thing we get a lot of feedback on, or if we post something on social media, there we go, social media, but we'll get responses. We'll close the border, and you'll solve the problem. Now, the border is a huge problem, and you and I talked about this the other day. It's not just drug smuggling, but how big a part of the solution is simply closing the border?
Yeah,
And,
I mean,
and what are the Border Patrol agents facing right now?
so that's a great question. And here are the challenges. Does what's going on at the border today affect the flow of fentanyl into the United States? The answer is yes, because there are limited resources, and a lot of the law enforcement resources, and I know this because as a leader in Los Angeles, I got phone calls from Border Patrol commanders who we partnered with on drug interdiction who said, hey, we can't support this particular operation anymore. Our people are being called to work the border because of the humanitarian crisis there. So my point here is there's limited resources to address everything happening at the border. If those resources are diverted to address this migrant surge, they're not looking for fentanyl. That's just fact, right? Something has to be done to address that. When I hear people say shut down the border, I'm not really sure what that means. The traffic coming across our border with Mexico now from south to north, even just here in California, is astronomical. The last time I looked at the data was for December, and just one border crossing, the San Isidro crossing in California, in the San Diego area, there was like 1.2, 1.3 million vehicles last December that crossed from south to north. And if you broke that down over the month, I mean, obviously there's times when no one's crossing. There's times when there's hundreds and hundreds of cars crossing, waiting in line. But that's a car every 2 seconds. That's the volume of traffic that's coming across the border. So are we saying that we're going to search every vehicle? Even a quick 5-10 minute search, if we did that for 1 hour, the line to cross the border coming into the United States would be 8 or 9 hours long. So I don't know that that's practical. I think the future of a secure border, at least on the drug side, is using a lot of artificial intelligence, doing a better job of mapping criminal networks and associating them with vehicles, and then keying on those vehicles, identifying where drugs are hidden in those vehicles, and then keying on like vehicles of the same model and year, and doing searches in those same areas. Just using AI to better police the border is something that really should be a priority investment, I think, going forward, and then something to address the humanitarian surge that's diverting resources away from the drug threat.
Well, of course, there have been a lot of changes since 9/11 that work, I think, in tandem with drug interdiction. Again, talking about whether it's the money laundering or banking laws have changed a lot since 9/11. But we sure are losing. I hate to say that, but we're losing big time right now. Also one last thing, this sort of going back earlier to talking about prescription drug abuse, and I know, again, I'm really leaping back, but back to the quotas, because we talked about this.
Yep.
The quotas bug me because they're arbitrary. It's the quota the DEA sets seems to me to be it's the same as the demand for these drugs, and of course we're not talking illicit drugs, right? I guess maybe how much raw opium. What would the word be? Poppies. The raw poppies coming in. Raw opium. They would actually come in for pharmaceutical purposes is one, but. The quotas, are they still based simply on demand? Why is it a quota if it's based on demand?
It's a challenge. I mean, that's always so people understand. The DEA has obviously the criminal enforcement authority that we all hear about, busting the cocaine dealer, busting the fentanyl dealer. I don't think what a lot of people know is that DEA has a regulatory duty to regulate all things controlled prescription drugs. If it's a scheduled drug, and generally that's the more dangerous drugs, they have limited medical uses in some cases or a high propensity for abuse. Those particular drugs, DEA sets a quota on each one of those drugs. They determine how much can be produced every year. How is that quota determined, Mary? I think you're right. It's just like the manufacturers come in and say, here's what we need. And DEA says, okay, that sounds about right. I mean, hey, there's been times when DEA has pushed back, and it creates this. We saw it in with opiates in the late 90s, early 2000s, where when DEA pushes back, all of a sudden you hear stories about patients not getting their pain medication, and this isn't fair to the patients, and this is having an impact on healthcare. Who knows what the truth is, but the premise that the manufacturer decides what the quota is going to be, is it really even a quota then?
Certainly not when you see the kind of diversion we saw. The pills that were going to Florida, Appalachia,
West Virginia, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And I know I really went back, and now it seems like it's a moot point with fentanyl and where we are. It almost seems like, the good old days when people were just chopping up OxyContin and snorting it.
Right.
But my point with it, my frustration with it, has always been the disconnect, I think, between certain, whether it's leadership at DEA, whether it's policymakers or whomever, but the disconnect between what's happening on the supply side and what's really happening on the demand side, what's really happening in our houses and our streets.
Yeah.
And I can say that about the DEA. I can say that about FDA. I have great respect for all of them, but every once in a while, there's this lag. And that lag is where people die.
Hey, one more thing on that is, to illustrate that point, I've seen things with stimulant prescriptions over the past couple of years, specifically Adderall, that remind me personally of what I saw with OxyContin in the 90s and early 2000s. Now, am I saying that Adderall is as bad a drug as OxyContin? No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is I've seen similar prescribing practices. I've seen as we get to a point where the market can't supply the amount of drugs needed, I've seen the same thing where people in the industry are now reaching out saying people are being denied their medication. There's a shortage. I saw, which I am in tremendous disagreement with, the head of DEA and the head of FDA wrote an open letter asking the drug makers to make more Adderall to support the market. I think that was a mistake that we will regret in 15 years. And to top it off, I've now seen the Mexican drug cartels start to counterfeit Adderall pills. So now they're flooding the market with these counterfeit Adderall pills where the active ingredient is clandestinely manufactured methamphetamine. It's almost like the same thing I see playing out again that I saw with OxyContin. And, I feel like you said, people aren't necessarily recognizing it, or it's a little bit of a disconnect of what our next steps should be with respect to that.
I think what's especially insidious about this Adderall issue is that, generally speaking, you hear about these Adderall misuse for college kids who are trying so hard to study. These are kids who are on the right path to a great future, and then they get offered this illicit Adderall that's laced with fentanyl, and there you have it.
Yep.
And so that's where it's especially scary, because it is so easy to hide, and it is the perfect storm. And hopefully we learn some lessons from the past. I don't know if we're there, but I want to thank you for your years of service. That's a long time.
It is a long time.
Are your knees still in good shape?
No, not really. There's not much about me that's in good shape.
I think at my age, my age too. It's like, I think our older age is just the inventory of the stupid things we did in our youth.
Yeah.
Or in your case, the brave things you did in your youth. But what are you doing now, Bill?
Hey, the one thing I wanted to do, and I'll say it quickly, is I wanted to do something as far from government service as possible. When you work for the government, you know what your paycheck's going to be this year, next year, 10 years from now. You know when you're going to get paid. I decided to start my own business. I do consulting and investigative work. It's been a lot of fun so far. I'm enjoying it. I've also actually started doing a podcast with a gentleman named Mark Garrett, retired chief of the California Highway Patrol. You may remember his name. I don't know. Anyhow, we do that, have a lot of fun. We've talked about Snapchat. We've talked about COSA, the Kids Online Safety Act. We talk about a lot of the issues that we're encountering and try to interject some common sense into the discussion. So it's been retirement. I've been busy. That's good. And I'm having fun.
That's great. Your podcast sounds fascinating. How do people find it?
Yeah, Truth Nation Podcast. It's on all the platforms. On YouTube, where we're trying to grow the Truth Nation Podcast. Check us out. Please like, share, and subscribe, Mary. You know the deal.
Like, share, and subscribe. So before I close, and just thank you, Bill, again, for your career, for your service, for your level-headedness, for everything you've done and what you're still going to do, because I have a feeling you're going to be quite busy. But I just want to say something about podcasting. I had one mother reach out to me the other day, one in specific, who said, I have a 15-year-old son, and I know he would never do drugs, but I think I'm going to ask him to carry Narcan. And, we had a little back and forth about some of the controversies on that and how do you feel about it. And she said, I know that this is the right thing, that my son will be in a time and a place.
Yep.
And right then and then I thought, this podcast is worth it.
Yep, 100%.
That one mother reaching out, asking, should I have him carry, might make a huge difference. Podcasting,
that's already a success. Yeah, that's what it's all about. Yep.
More than numbers. I think that one number was a great metric for me.
Yep.
And again, other people can reach out to us at hello@sagelyspeaking.com with questions or comments. And again, I want to thank our listeners very much for joining us this week. Bill, you make me nervous or something. I'm so tongue-tied today.
It's the DEA. DEA people make everyone nervous. I know the deal.
Well, for what it's worth, people are listening. Right over your shoulder, you have this big DEA badge.
I know,
logo
and my jacket here, right? By the way, I got that jacket on OfferUp.
What is OfferUp?
OfferUp is like a Craigslist.
Oh.
Yeah.
So you didn't earn that jacket?
I had one. I had to turn it in. And then when I retired, I thought, I just looking through the internet one day, and supposedly it was used in a movie. I don't know how true that was, but it's pretty cool. So I'm glad I have that as a memory of the old days.
Well, maybe that's what's tripping me up with my words. Again, I want to thank our listeners and our sponsors who make the show possible. Our sponsors are MAPTA Action, and CUSP. Again, we'd love to hear from you. Any stories or questions, please reach out. You can find us at hello@sagelyspeaking.com. And thank you again, Bill, and thank you all very much to our listeners for being here. Until next time, be well.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you for joining us today on Sagely Speaking with Mary Bono. Remember, wisdom is a journey, not a destination. For more insights, visit our website at sagelyspeaking.com.